Right now, you might be standing in the center of your own life, holding a heavy iron hammer, as if the slightest tremor in your posture could shatter the temple of your existence. There is a deep, resonant ache behind your ribs, a feeling of being a great bell that has been wrapped in thick, velvet fabric for so many years that the sound of your own truth has become muffled, distant, and strange. Maybe you find yourself rehearsing your words long after the conversation has ended, checking the thickness of the velvet to ensure no one catches a glimpse of the fractures in the metal. You have spent your energy guarding against the sound of your own resonance, fearing that if you were ever truly heard, if your vulnerabilities were ever allowed to ring out into the open air, it would only reveal how empty or broken you have become. The room around you is cooling as the evening deepens, and perhaps the faint, metallic scent of rain on dry stone drifts in through a slightly opened window, grounding you in the present. Yet your mind is still pacing the halls of a silent, guarded structure, terrified of the very act of vibration. It is exhausting to live as a bell that refuses to ring. You carry this weight not because you are flawed, but because you have been taught that safety is found in silence, and that your value depends on keeping your internal cracks hidden from the world. You are not broken for feeling this need to protect yourself. You are simply responding to the human fear of being exposed. What you are feeling is not a failure of character, but the natural, heavy consequence of a life spent holding back your own vibration. Tonight, we will not force your mind to become silent or still. We will not try to smooth over the cracks or pretend that the weight of your protection isn't there. Instead, we are going to learn what happens when we stop muffling the sound of our own hearts, and how the very things you fear are flaws might actually be the pathways to a deeper, more honest resonance. Consider this paradox. The bell does not need to be solid and uncracked to produce a beautiful, healing tone. It only needs to be open enough for the vibration to travel. You have been suffering, not because you have fractures, but because you have spent your entire life trying to silence them. You believe that if you just hold your breath and keep the velvet tight, you will avoid the sting of being seen. But the Buddhist wisdom here is clear. The suffering that drains your energy is not the wound itself, it is the constant, muscular effort of holding your own life together. We cannot stop the events of the world from touching us, but we can stop trying to prevent the sound of our own response. Peace is not a state of being unmoved or uncracked, it is the courage to vibrate with the truth of where you currently stand. Dear friend, you are safe enough to soften right now. You do not have to carry the hammer of self-judgment into the quiet of this night. There is no requirement for you to prove your substance or to demonstrate your perfection to the dark. You are allowed to be exactly as you are, a bell that has weathered the seasons, a life that has felt the pressure of the world, and a spirit that is finally realizing it doesn't need a covering to be valuable. Nothing is required of you here. There is no one waiting for you to strike a note, and there is no performance that needs to be polished before you sleep. You can simply let the weight of that heavy iron hammer slip from your fingers and rest on the floor. Take a slow, natural breath, and as you release it, feel the velvet cloth of your defenses begin to loosen. You do not have to rip it away, you can just notice the places where it has been pinned tight against your own skin. Maybe your jaw has been set to guard your words, or your breath has been shallow to avoid drawing attention to your chest. As you inhale again, invite a gentle, slow expansion, a way of allowing your body to occupy its own space without the need to brace for an impact that isn't coming. You are in a sanctuary now, a place where the air is still and the shadows are gentle, and the world is far away from the performance of your daily tasks. You might notice that as you start to unwrap the velvet, a feeling of vulnerability rises. That is perfectly natural. For so long that covering has been your home, your protection and your mask. It feels strange to be exposed to the cool, open air. Do not be afraid of that initial feeling of being too loud or too raw. That is not emptiness, that is the return of your own capacity to feel. You have been living in a muffled state because you feared your own depth. But deep down, that depth is where your ability to connect with others and with yourself truly lives. You are not losing your substance by letting go, you are finally beginning to resonate. If it feels right, let your eyes drift shut, if they have not done so already. Feel the way the surface beneath you welcomes your weight. There is no need to be on right now. There is no map you must follow, and no destination you must arrive at before the sun rises. You are simply a person resting in the dark, and your worth is not tied to the quality of your sound or the perfection of your shape. It is tied to your willingness to exist, to breathe, and to inhabit this moment without the armor of your own judgment. In a short while, we will enter the story of a master bell founder who believed that only a flawless instrument could serve the world. And we will see how his understanding changed when he stopped trying to build a fortress and started trying to build a beacon. But for now, simply notice the sensation of your heart beating in the silence. It is a soft, steady rhythm, like the faint hum of metal before it is struck. It doesn't need your interference. It doesn't need to be louder or quieter. It is already doing its work, and so are you. Everything you have worried about tonight, every crack you have tried to hide, can wait until tomorrow. You are safe here, and you are finally invited to stop the ringing of your own alarm. You can just be the bell, resting in the temple of the night, waiting for nothing, needing nothing, and perfectly content in the silence. In a valley where the mist clung to the stone walls of a remote mountain temple, there lived a bell founder named Soren. For most of his life, he had been obsessed with the creation of the perfect sound. He spent his days in a scorched workshop, tending to the white-hot furnace, hammering bronze into shapes that he believed would define the peace of the entire region. He was a man of heavy, calloused hands and a mind that never stopped moving. He felt that if he could only forge a bell with a tone so pure, so resonant, and so completely unbroken, he would finally find the quietude he lacked within himself. Soren's temple bell was a masterpiece of iron and copper, towering and dark, yet he lived in a state of quiet terror. He believed that the bell possessed a hidden, microscopic fracture, a structural flaw that he could not see but could always feel. He was convinced that if the bell were ever struck with enough force, the sound would not be a harmonious tolling, but a grating, jarring screech that would reveal his own incompetence to the monks and travelers below. To protect the temple and himself, he kept the bell wrapped in thick layers of wine-colored velvet. He told the monks that the velvet was to keep the dust away. But in his heart, he knew he was hiding the bell from the air itself, muffling its voice so that its potential failure would remain a secret. His hands were constantly stained with metallic dust, and he often paced the stone courtyard at night, his own breathing ragged and uneven. He felt like the bell a thing meant to ring out, but held in a state of unnatural, forced silence. The weight of this secret was like a cold stone in his chest. He watched the other monks move through the temple with a lightness he could not fathom, their laughter drifting like smoke. He, however, remained tied to his workshop, convinced that his entire worth depended on the bell remaining perfectly soundless and perfectly shrouded. One autumn afternoon, an elderly temple keeper, a woman named Inara, who walked with a slow, steady gait, approached his workshop. She was not a bell founder, nor did she know the intricacies of bronze casting. She was simply the one who tended the temple gardens, her fingernails always dark with the soil of the mountain. She stopped at the open door, watching as Soren frantically brushed more oil onto the bell's surface, his eyes wide and feverish. "Soren," Inara said, her voice cutting through the dry, metallic silence of the room. She held a small, heavy, blackened iron hammer in her hand, a tool usually used for breaking open mountain stones. She stepped into the workshop, the air cooling around her presence. Soren braced himself, his body tightening. "You shouldn't be here, Inara. The bell is fragile. The dust of the gardens will ruin the finish." Inara didn't stop. She moved to the side of the towering bell, her eyes tracing the thick velvet wrappings that looked like a heavy winter coat on a summer day. She held up the iron hammer. "The monks are wondering why the temple has been silent for 3 seasons. They say the mountain feels like it is holding its breath." "The bell is not ready," Soren snapped, his hands shaking. "There is a flaw. I can feel the fracture in the metal. If I ring it, the truth will be heard, and the temple will lose its grace." Inara leaned against the cool, dark iron of the bell, not caring about the oil. She took the hammer and laid it gently on the stone floor near Soren's feet. "I have spent my life watching the rocks of this mountain," she whispered. "I have seen how the ice cracks the granite in the deep of winter. Do you think the mountain is less beautiful because of the cracks? Do you think the rock loses its voice when the frost splits it? She didn't wait for his answer. She reached out and, with a swift, decisive motion, pulled at the corner of the wine-colored velvet. It fell away with a dry, dusty sigh, revealing the dark, oxidized bronze beneath. Soren flinched, as if he had been struck. He waited for the catastrophe, the sight of the hidden break that would prove he was a failure. But the bell stood there, perfectly smooth, perfectly dark, and utterly silent. Inara reached for the iron hammer on the floor. She didn't use it to strike the bell. Instead, she knelt and handed the heavy tool to Soren. Her touch was firm, grounding him. You are not the bell, Soren, but you have lived as if you were the shroud. You believe that your protection is the same thing as your existence. If you do not let the bell ring, you will never know if it is broken or whole. You are choosing a permanent, muffled safety over the risk of a real sound. She turned and began to walk toward the door, stopping only for a second to look back. The fracture you fear is not a flaw in the bell. It is the distance you have placed between yourself and the world. If you strike it and it cracks, then you will finally know the sound of a bell that has truly lived. Is that not better than a bell that has only ever known the dark? Soren stood alone in the workshop. The silence was absolute. He looked at the iron hammer in his hand, its weight familiar and grounding. He looked at the massive, exposed bell. He thought of his life, wrapped in the thick, stifling fabric of his own anxiety, always checking for the fracture, always waiting for the moment he would be found out. He realized that the flaw he had been guarding was simply the fact that he was human, that he was capable of being hurt, and that he was capable of change. He took a breath, a slow, deep intake of the mountain air that smelled of cedar and damp earth. He did not strike the bell immediately. Instead, he simply rested his hand against the cold metal, feeling the vibration of his own heartbeat pulsing through the bronze. For the first time, he didn't try to identify a fracture. He didn't try to measure his worth against the sound. He just stood there, his skin pressed against the history of the metal, and allowed himself to exist in the silence. Unmasked and unprotected, the hammer remained in his other hand. But his grip was no longer white-knuckled. He was waiting not for a catastrophe, but for the courage to hear whatever sound the bell was meant to make. The room felt larger, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in years, the knot in his chest began to loosen, letting him see that the fear of the sound was not the same thing as the sound itself. He remained still, simply breathing, the iron hammer resting in his palm like a promise he was finally beginning to understand. This story does not imply that your pain is imaginary, or that you should strive to become a person who feels nothing at all. It does not ask you to harden your heart against the difficult vibrations of life, nor does it suggest that you stop caring deeply about the people or the purposes you hold dear. It is simply inviting you to look at the difference between the chime of the world and the way you muffle your own life in response. For as long as you can remember, you have likely believed that your safety lay in silence, that if you could just keep your vulnerabilities covered in velvet, you would be untouchable. You assumed that the cracks in your metal were the evidence of your failure, and that the only way to avoid catastrophe was to ensure the world never heard the true, unvarnished sound of your heart. Buddhist wisdom suggests that this very effort is the source of a deeper exhaustion than any external difficulty could ever cause. There is a profound distinction between the first touch of life, the reality of being human, of being hurt, of being vulnerable, and the second touch, which is the internal reaction we pile on top. The first touch is what life brings to you. It is the inevitable contact with change, with disappointment, or with the friction of being a sensitive creature in a loud world. This first touch is not something you can control. It is simply the reality of having a beating heart. But the second touch, the one that keeps you pacing your workshop in the dead of night, is the layer of judgment, panic, and resistance your mind adds to the first. You add the second touch when you tell yourself that you are broken because you are hurting. You add it when you look at your history and see only a series of structural failures. You add it when you spend your energy not on living, but on maintaining the shroud. That internal struggle, the constant, frantic effort to keep the velvet pinned tight against the metal, is the source of your deepest weariness. It is not the world that has exhausted you. It is the iron hammer of your own self-judgment that you have been wielding against your own capacity to ring. When we speak of attachment, we are not talking about your capacity for love or your commitment to your craft. We are talking about the way the mind turns a preference into a rigid demand. You demand that your life remain flawless, that your emotions remain controlled, and that your path be free of any visible crack. When you demand this, you are effectively trying to prevent the bell from ever being heard. The more force you use to keep the velvet in place, the more you suffer, because you are denying the very nature of what you are. You are a bell designed for resonance, yet you are living as if you were a fortress designed for silence. Impermanence, the teaching that all things are shifting, is often misunderstood as a reason to be afraid. We see the changing world, and we see the possibility of the strike, the possibility of the break. But the insight of the bell founder is that the break is not an ending. The truth that the mountain taught the temple keeper is that a life without resonance is a life that has never truly met the world. If you refuse to be heard, you are not saving yourself from pain. You are merely ensuring that you remain separate from the life that is trying to touch you. You are choosing a permanent, muffled safety over the risk of being a living, vibrating, and resonant presence. Letting go is not an act of surrender to failure. It is the act of dropping the velvet. It is the realization that your cracks are not flaws, but pathways for the light and for the sound to enter and exit your life. When you stop muffling your own truth, you are not becoming less. You are finally becoming enough. You are finally allowing the frequency of your own soul to travel, which is the only way you can ever truly connect with the people around you. They do not want a bell that is shrouded in silence. They want to hear the truth of you, in all your resonance, in all your fragility, and in all your beauty. Mindfulness is simply the ability to notice the hammer in your hand. It is the gentle awareness that says, "Ah, I am reaching for the velvet again. I am preparing to hide myself from the world because I am afraid of the sound." You do not need to scold yourself for that impulse. You do not need to turn that realization into another reason to feel ashamed. You only need to notice it. You only need to see that you are holding a tool meant for protection that has instead become an instrument of your own silencing. Awareness gives you the space to set that tool down, just as Soren finally rested his hand against the cold, dark iron, knowing he did not have to strike until the time was right. Compassion, in this light, is the tenderness you show toward your own history. It is the ability to look at your fractures, the moments where life has struck you, the places where you have been bent, the times you felt you had to hide, and to see them as the history of a vessel that has survived. You don't have to pretend you were never hurt. You don't have to act as if the metal is pristine. You only need to recognize that your history is the very thing that gives your voice its unique texture, its depth, and its capacity to offer comfort to others. You have spent so much energy trying to be the perfect version of yourself, believing that if you were just solid and soundless, you would be worthy of peace. But the peace you are looking for is not found in the absence of cracks. It is found in the ability to ring out into the open air without needing to know exactly how the world will respond. You don't have to be the strongest thing on the mountain. You don't have to be a fortress that never yields. You only have to be a bell that is finally willing to let the shroud fall away, trusting that if you are struck, the sound that emerges will be the honest truth of who you are. And that truth is more than enough. Think of the silence that has filled your life, not the peaceful, restorative silence of a deep rest, but the tense, guarded silence of a life being held back. You have been waiting for someone else to pull the velvet away, waiting for a permission that can only ever come from your own hand. You have been afraid that the sound you make would be ugly, or disruptive, or that it would reveal your emptiness. But the emptiness you fear is actually the space where the sound lives. It is the hollow center that gives the bell its voice. You are not empty, you are open. And that openness is the doorway to everything you have been looking for. You don't need to strike the bell tonight. You don't need to announce yourself to the world or prove your resonance to anyone. That is a task for another time, in another light. Tonight, the task is much smaller and much more profound. It is simply the task of allowing the velvet to hang loose. It is the task of feeling the cool, quiet air against the metal of your own being. Knowing that you are safe in this state of exposure, you are not required to do anything. You are not required to be anything. You are simply a bell, resting in the temple of the night, existing without the need to perform. Notice how the room feels as you contemplate this. The edges of your concern are softening, becoming less like sharp iron and more like the gentle fading vibration of a hum. You have held your breath for so long, trying to keep the silence perfect, that you may have forgotten how good it feels to simply let the air move in and out of your body. You are not losing your substance by relaxing. You are finally letting your substance settle into its own natural, comfortable form. You are not a structure that needs to be defended. You are a presence that is allowed to simply occupy this space, supported by the floor, held by the quiet, and warmed by the slow, steady rhythm of your own heart. We are preparing to go deeper into the way this silence can be transformed into a practice. But for now, just stay here. Stay in the realization that you are already resonant, even in your silence. You are already whole, even in your fractures. You are already enough, even before the bell is struck. Let the weight of the protection you've carried slide away, leaving you light, leaving you open, and leaving you perfectly at ease in the presence of your own quiet truth. You have spent your life trying to hold the world at bay, but the world is not your enemy. It is the audience for your own unique sound, and it has been waiting, with a patience you can finally share, for you to be ready to simply be heard. Now, let us invite the essence of this wisdom into the quiet sanctuary of your own mind. There is no requirement for you to change your posture or adjust your breathing to meet some ideal standard. Simply allow yourself to exist exactly as you are, resting in the space you have carved out for yourself tonight. We are not seeking to empty your consciousness or to drive away the thoughts that have been weaving through your inner landscape all day. Instead, we are practicing a more gentle art, the art of observing the iron hammer without becoming the strike itself. If it feels right, notice the rhythm of your own breathing. You do not need to lengthen it or force a specific pace. Just observe the rise and fall of your chest, as if you were watching the gentle movement of the air against the temple eaves. Each breath is an entry, and each breath is a release. You might feel the weight of your body settling deeper into the surface beneath you, a signal that your muscles are beginning to understand the invitation to pause. Your jaw, often held tight by the effort of managing the sound of your own life, can unhinge just a fraction. Your shoulders, which carry the invisible burden of the velvet shroud, can drift toward the surface of the bed, no longer tasked with holding the covering in place. Bring your attention to the thoughts that feel most urgent, the ones that tug at you with the need to be solved, fixed, or corrected. Perhaps it is a worry about a conversation, a plan for the coming week, or a flicker of regret about something already finished. Do not try to push these thoughts away, for to push is to struggle, and we are learning to loosen our hold. Simply notice them. Give them a name if you like, perhaps the need to muffle, or the fear of being heard. Acknowledge them for what they are, patterns of energy, mental ripples that have been caught in the currents of your mind. Imagine in the center of this quiet, mist-covered mountain temple, a dark, grand, and resonant bell. In your hands you hold the invisible silk ribbon that has been tying back the clapper, the symbol of your need to silence your own truth, to control how you appear to others, and to hide your fractures. Whenever a thought arises that demands you fix it, or that warns you of disaster if you allow yourself to be seen, imagine yourself gently, slowly untying that ribbon. You are not discarding your history or your past. You are simply allowing the clapper to hang free. You are taking the demand for silence out of your internal machinery and allowing your natural resonance to exist, even if only as a faint, distant hum. Watch as you loosen the ribbon. Observe the way your hands feel, now that they are no longer curled around the silk or the heavy, cold iron of the hammer. Feel the sense of openness in your palm. If the thought returns, if the urge to pick the hammer back up arises, know that this is not a failure. It is simply a habit of the mind, one that has kept you feeling safe for a long time. You can greet it with compassion, saying to yourself, I see you, but I do not need to strike with you right now and then. With the same gentle patience, you can place that impulse too upon the stone floor of the temple. There is no rush to finish this process. The bell house is vast, and it can hold every concern, every plan, and every worry you have brought with you into the night. You are not abandoning these things. You are simply creating a space where they can rest, and where you can rest alongside them. You are the bell founder who has finally stepped away from the workshop, realizing that the truth of your own voice does not drift into disaster, simply because you stop trying to dictate the sound. You are finally allowed to be unmanaged, unmeasured, and unmuffled. As you continue to breathe, notice the physical sensation of letting the ribbon fall. Does your chest feel lighter, even by a small degree? Does the space behind your eyes feel a little less crowded? This is the sensation of shifting from the role of the shroud maker to the role of the resonant being. You are watching your life unfold, rather than constantly trying to force it into a static, silent shape. You might notice that when you stop tugging at the velvet, the bell doesn't break, it remains, held together by the same forces that keep the mountain standing and the fog moving. It is not your suppression that keeps your life intact. It is the natural, rhythmic flow of existence itself. If the mind begins to spin, if you feel the old, familiar pull of the need to strike with the iron hammer of judgment, simply return to the feeling of your breath. Let the breath be the anchor that reminds you that you are here, in this room, in this moment, and that this moment does not require a single adjustment. You are safe enough to be still. You are safe enough to be exposed. Even if you don't feel entirely peaceful yet, even if the thoughts are still noisy or persistent, know that the act of noticing them, the act of choosing to untie the silk, is the most profound kind of wisdom. You don't need to believe that everything will be perfect tomorrow. You don't need to resolve the tension of your history. You only need to be present with the person who is resting right now. This is a practice of kindness towards yourself, a way of saying that you are worthy of existing even when you aren't sure what sound you might make. Your value is not tied to the clarity of your resonance or the perfection of your metal. It is inherent, quiet, and unchanging, much like the bronze that waits in the mountain air. Stay here for a few more cycles of breath, feeling the air fill your lungs and then empty out, carrying away the residue of the day's frantic effort to stay hidden. You are like the bell founder in the mist, finally letting the tools of his struggle rest in the cool, still air of the temple. The work is done for now. The sound is secure in the hands of the moment. Everything is as it is, and for tonight, that is enough. Feel your body becoming heavier, sinking into the support beneath you, trusting that the earth is strong enough to carry your weight, and that the night is soft enough to cradle your tired, resonant heart. You are not losing your substance by letting go. You are finally finding the resonance that has been waiting for you all along. You are not a machine meant to run until you break. You are a person, and your rest is the most honest sound of all. Let the velvet fall. Let the clapper be still. You are safe enough to simply be. In a valley temple at the edge of the known world, there lived a monk named Kaito, who had spent his entire life tending to a garden of stone lanterns. These lanterns were not meant for light, but for reflection. Each one was carved from porous volcanic rock, designed to catch the moss that grew during the rainy season. Kaito was known for his extreme discipline. He spent hours each morning with a tiny, soft-bristled brush, painstakingly cleaning the moss from every crevice, convinced that the lanterns had to remain pristine to be worthy of the temple grounds. He believed that if a single patch of green took hold, he was failing in his duty, and that this failure would somehow ripple outward to disrupt the entire order of the monastery. His struggle was not with the garden, but with the inevitable nature of the moisture that drifted down from the peaks. Every day the damp air would return, and every day Kaito would battle the growth. His hands were always chapped, his back permanently stooped, and his mind was a constant loop of vigilance. He lived in terror of the day he would wake up to find the stone covered, fearing that if he lost his grip on the garden, he would lose his place in the temple. He had become a man of hard edges, his own spirit as rigid and unyielding as the rock he polished. One afternoon, a young, frantic traveler arrived at the temple gates carrying a broken wooden lute. The traveler had been wandering for weeks, his clothes torn, his eyes wild with the exhaustion of someone who had spent his entire journey trying to hold his life together after a devastating loss. He had come to the temple, because he had heard it was a place of profound order, and he hoped that if he could just stay in such a place, he might finally stop feeling like he was falling apart. He watched Kaito at his work, the monk's rhythmic, frantic scrubbing, and the traveler felt a strange, jarring resonance. He saw in the monk a mirror of his own desperate attempt to tidy up his shattered history. The traveler sat on the temple steps, his fingers tracing the snapped strings of his lute. He didn't speak, he just watched the monk. After several hours, Kaito paused, his breath coming in short, strained hitches. He looked at the traveler, and for the first time really saw the man's misery. It wasn't the look of a visitor. It was the look of a person who had been trying to scrub the moss off his own soul. Inara, the old temple keeper from the valley, happened to be passing through the courtyard. She noticed the tension between them, the monk's rigid devotion to his clean stones, and the traveler's hollow, defeated posture. She walked over to the largest lantern, a heavy piece standing in the center of the path, and she placed her hand firmly over Kaito's wrist, stopping his hand in mid-motion. "Kaito," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the authority of the mountain. "The rain is not your enemy. The moss is not your failure. Why do you treat the garden as if it were a battlefield?" Kaito dropped the brush, his eyes brimming with a sudden, sharp, and entirely unexpected grief. "If I stop, the temple will be forgotten. If the moss takes over, the lanterns will lose their purpose. I have to keep them clean. I have to show that I am doing my part." Inara didn't argue. She turned to the traveler and gestured to the broken lute. "And you, young friend, why do you carry that instrument? It can no longer make music. It is only a reminder of the silence you fear." The traveler looked at the lute, his knuckles white against the wood. "I keep it because it is all I have left of my life before the change. If I put it down, I am no one." Inara took a deep breath, the sound of it like the wind moving through the temple eaves. She stepped to the largest stone lantern, the one Kaito had spent his life protecting, and with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached out and scooped a handful of damp, vibrant green moss from the base, rubbing it firmly into the porous stone of the lantern's cap. She then turned to the traveler and took the broken lute from his lap, setting it down gently on the mossy ground beside the lantern. "The stone was made to hold the life of the mountain," Inara said to Kaito, "and your hands were made to hold the tools of your life, not to be broken by them. The moss is not a flaw, it is a sign that the temple is breathing. And for you," she turned to the traveler, "the silence of the lute is not an end. It is simply the space where a new song can eventually begin, if you would only give it the room to be heard." Kaito stood frozen, his hands still suspended in the air where he had been scrubbing. He looked at the patch of vibrant green on the stone. It looked soft, rich, and deeply alive. He felt a strange, quiet release in his chest, a sudden, unexpected permission to stop the labor that had defined his identity. He realized that the temple had never asked him for perfection. The temple had only asked him for his presence, and he had been absent the entire time, lost in the scrubbing. The traveler reached out and touched the moss on the lantern, his fingers trembling slightly. He looked at his own empty hands, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel the sudden, jarring urge to reach for something to fix, something to mend, or something to hold. He simply rested his hands on his knees and he began to breathe. It wasn't a perfect breath, and his chest still felt the weight of his grief. But the frantic, clawing need to justify his existence had vanished, replaced by the simple, quiet awareness of the damp earth beneath him. Kaito did not magically become a different person. He didn't put away his tools forever, and he didn't become a master of leisure in an instant, but he did make one small, vital shift. He reached down, picked up his brush, and instead of scrubbing, he simply used it to clear a path of dust away from the base of the lantern, allowing the water to drain properly. It was a small act of care, not an act of erasure. He realized that he could attend to his work without trying to control the inevitable cycle of growth. He could choose to tend to the garden, rather than fighting a war against the mountain. The traveler didn't walk away with a new lute, and he didn't suddenly forget the pain of his loss, but he did leave the broken instrument on the ground, leaning it against the mossy lantern. He walked out of the temple gates not with a plan to find a new identity, but with a willingness to walk into the unknown, carrying only his own breath and the memory of the moss. He had learned that his life was not a series of broken strings to be restrung, but a journey that could be undertaken even in the presence of his own deep, echoing silence. As the evening began to settle over the valley, Kaido watched the light fade. He saw the way the moss glowed in the twilight, a soft, emerald velvet that seemed to hold the dampness of the day. He felt a sudden, profound sense of stillness, a settling of his own spirit that had nothing to do with cleanliness and everything to do with acceptance. He was just a monk in a garden, and that was enough. He didn't need to be the defender of the temple's purity. He was allowed to be a participant in the mountain's life, flaws and all. He felt the cool, damp air on his skin, a reminder that he was alive, that he was moving, and that the world was moving with him. He turned toward the temple, his footsteps quiet and unhurried, leaving the garden to the moss, the rain, and the slow, steady rhythm of the night. He was finally, truly, moving toward his own rest, and for tonight, the lanterns were glowing in the dark, not because he had cleaned them, but because they had finally been allowed to exist. The comfort that settled over Kaito as he stopped the endless scrubbing, and the quietude that finally found the traveler as he left his broken instrument behind, reveals a fundamental truth about why the human heart grows so weary. We have spent lifetimes believing that if we are not actively managing, correcting, and polishing the surface of our own history, we are failing. We believe that if we stop applying the effort of control, our internal structure will surely collapse into a heap of meaningless rubble. But this very belief is the source of the crushing fatigue you feel in your bones tonight. You have been treating your own life like a temple lantern that must be shielded from every speck of natural growth, instead of a living resonance that is meant to participate in the cycle of rain, shadow, and light. Consider the mechanism of your own suffering. When something difficult happens, a harsh word from someone you respect, a sudden shift in your circumstances, or the quiet, gnawing realization that your path has diverged from your expectations, this is the first touch of life. It is the raw, unadorned reality of existence. It is the sudden drop in temperature when the clouds move in, or the feeling of being caught in the rain without shelter. This first touch is inevitable because life is inherently changing, shifting, and unpredictable. It is the nature of the world to be fluid, and fluidity means encountering resistance. But the second touch, the one that keeps you pacing the halls of your own mind when the house is dark and the echoes are long, is something entirely different. It is the layer of judgment, panic, and fierce resistance that your mind pours over the first touch. You add the second touch when you tell yourself that the difficulty should not be there. You add it when you label your feelings of being cracked or hollow as a defect of your character, rather than a natural response to the intensity of being alive. You add it when you replay the past, searching for the exact moment you could have prevented the fracture, or when you rehearse the future, trying to calculate a way to remain forever immune to the fall. This internal struggle, this constant, frantic effort to make the world different than it is the second wound. It is not the situation that is draining your vitality. It is the friction of your resistance against it. You might wonder why the mind does this, given that it leads to such profound unhappiness. But remember, the mind is a survival mechanism. It believes that if it can just think through every contingency, if it can just identify every potential flaw, it can shield you from the sting of reality. Your overthinking is not a sign of your brokenness. It is a misguided attempt at protection. It is like the monk standing in the garden, so terrified of the moss that he forgets the lantern was meant to live in the rain. He is so tired, so worn thin by his own vigilance, that he has forgotten the garden is a place of growth, not a museum of static perfection. When you try to fix yourself through shame, you are essentially trying to mend the bell by striking it harder. You are using the very tool of your suffering self-judgment to try and create a state of peace, but you cannot create resonance through the energy of conflict. When you judge yourself for being fragile, you only create more tension. When you judge yourself for being human, you only add bitterness to the experience of being. This is why you feel like you are chasing your own shadow. You are attempting to resolve the restlessness of the mind by using the restlessness of the mind as your primary instrument. The wisdom here is not that you should stop having thoughts or feelings. It is that you should stop treating every thought as a command to act, and every feeling as a truth that defines your entire identity. When a thought of inadequacy arises, you don't have to turn it into an identity. You don't have to become the flaw. You can simply observe it as the wind passing over the temple eaves. You can look at it and acknowledge, there is the feeling of being exposed, or there is a thought about how I should be doing better. And then you can choose not to pick up the iron hammer of judgment. You can choose not to invest your energy into the story that the thought is trying to tell you. Peace is not the state where the bell remains perfectly silent and unmoving. Peace is the state where you are no longer at war with the fact that you can be moved. It is a different relationship with the reality of your life. When you encounter a setback, you no longer see it as a tragedy. You see it as a mark of your own history. You no longer see your vulnerability as a personal failing. You see it as a resonance. Because you are not adding that second layer of resistance, the energy of the emotion does not get stuck. It moves, it flows, and it dissipates on its own, leaving your heart clear once more. You have turned your pain into an identity because it felt like the only way to make sense of your experience. If you are the person who is always falling apart, then at least you have a name for what you are going through. But this identity is a cage. It locks you into a narrative that requires you to stay on guard, to keep scrubbing, to keep explaining. Tonight you are invited to set that identity down. You are not your history. You are the space in which the history occurred. You are not your mistakes. You are the observer who has lived through them and is still here, still breathing and still capable of being felt. The fear of uncertainty is perhaps the deepest layer of this cage. You cling to the hope that if you can just predict what is coming, you will be safe. But the future is never as rigid as your fears pretend. It is fluid. It is open. And it is precisely because it is uncertain that it holds the possibility for genuine connection, for new patterns, and for unexpected moments of beauty. Your desire for total control is actually a refusal to participate in the real life that is unfolding right in front of you. When you notice yourself rehearsing the future, gently ask yourself, am I trying to solve a problem that exists right now? Or am I trying to control a possibility that hasn't happened? Most often you will find that you are agonizing over a narrative that exists only in your mind. You are trying to polish a lantern that is currently sitting in the middle of a storm. By returning your attention to the simple, physical reality of your breath or the feeling of your body against the bed, you are stepping out of the loop of rehearsal and back into the sanctuary of the present. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be uncertain. You are allowed to be a person who is still learning how to let go. There is no requirement for you to be a finished, silent, perfectly polished artifact by the time the sun rises. You are exactly where you need to be, which is in the middle of a process of transformation. The fact that you can recognize your own tendency to hold on, the fact that you can witness the second touch as it begins to form, this is evidence of your awakening. Compassion is the bridge that takes you from the second wound back to yourself. It is the ability to look at the tired, anxious, and worried parts of you and offer them the same grace you would offer a traveler who has been carrying a broken lute for miles. You don't tell the traveler they are a failure for being exhausted. You help them set the instrument down so they can finally rest their hands. You can do the same for yourself. You can place your hand on your heart and acknowledge, this is difficult. I am tired of trying to be perfect, and it is okay to let the velvet fall away for tonight. This is wisdom. This is the recognition that your strength was never found in the thickness of your armor, but in the honesty of your open heart. As you lie here, feel the space around you. Notice how the room holds you, how the darkness does not ask anything of you, and how the silence is not a void but a container for your rest. You have spent your energy trying to construct a safety that can never exist in the way you imagined. The true safety is in the realization that you do not need to hold the bell together. The bell is held by the mountain, by the air, and by the natural unfolding rhythm of the world itself. You are part of that whole, and you are finally, mercifully, invited to simply rest as a participant, rather than a manager. You can stop fixing, you can stop hiding, you can finally just be. This capacity to let the clapper hang free, to untie the velvet shroud, and to finally allow the resonance of your life to exist without the need for constant, frantic modification, is not a practice restricted to the quiet of a mountain temple. It is a vital, breathing art that belongs to the rush and the noise of your ordinary modern days. You may notice that the urge to reach for the iron hammer, to strike out in judgment, or to build a fortress of silence arises most acutely in the small, seemingly mundane moments of your life. The silence that stretches out after a text is sent, the pressure of feeling as though you are falling behind your peers, or the sharp, stinging awareness of a mistake that you feel compelled to hide behind a mask of perfect composure. In these instances, you are not failing to be enlightened. You are simply encountering the terrain of your own life, and the terrain is often rugged, steep, and shadowed. When you find yourself lying awake at night, the silence of your room magnifying every thought of the day's errors, notice the way your mind immediately looks for the iron hammer. You feel the need to solve, to fix, to justify, or to disappear. But this is where the wisdom of the resonant bell becomes your most practical friend. You do not have to strike. You do not have to resolve the tension or force a state of calm. You can simply be the vessel that is feeling the vibration, acknowledging the hum of the anxiety without needing to turn it into a loud, frantic clang that alerts the entire household of your inner turmoil. Peace is practiced in these small, unglamorous moments of restraint. The next time you find yourself about to send a message from a place of insecurity, pause. Take one single breath before your fingers touch the screen. Let that breath be the space between the iron and the bronze. In that tiny, fleeting pause, you are practicing the liberation of the bell. You are choosing not to strike from a place of fear. You are deciding that your worth is not dependent on the response you receive, but on the grace with which you inhabit your own silence. This is not weakness, it is a profound and sturdy strength. It is the wisdom of someone who knows that their resonance is not a product of external approval, but a natural, inherent quality of their own being. Consider the times you feel you must smile while your heart feels heavy, the times you perform strength because you are terrified that your fractures might be visible. We are taught that to be together is to be seamless, but look at the moss on the stone lantern. It does not hide the rock, it inhabits it. It celebrates the texture of the stone. You can live your life with this same openness. You can care deeply about your relationships, your career, and your future without needing to grip them with white-knuckled intensity. You can be dedicated to your craft without treating every minor error like the end of your world. When you stop trying to keep your life looking like an uncracked bell, you finally discover that your ability to connect with others increases because you are finally showing up as a person, not as a performance. The guilt that often arises when you try to rest the nagging voice that insists you haven't earned your stillness is just another layer of the velvet shroud. You believe that if you aren't hammering away at the bronze of your productivity, you are somehow less than. But you are not a machine meant to produce a constant, rhythmic chime. You are a human being, and your rest is as much a part of your resonance as your action. When you lie down at the end of a long day, you are not failing to be productive. You are honoring the need for the metal to cool. You are allowing the vibration to dissipate naturally. You can rest without a justification. You can exist without a score. You can be silent without being ashamed. Not every thought that enters your mind deserves an audience. Not every feeling that brushes against your heart is a command that you must follow. When you feel the familiar pull of self-criticism, imagine that it is a small, passing vibration, a minor ripple in the metal that does not need to be amplified by your own attention. You can let it hum and fade. You can watch it move through you, like the wind moving through the open eaves of a temple, without needing to shut the doors to keep the weather out. By not feeding the judgment, you are saving your energy for the things that actually matter. You are saving your resonance for the people and the passions that deserve your most authentic, unmuffled truth. This modern life is not a trap designed to keep you in a state of performance. It is a garden, much like the one Kaito tended, where the rain will always fall, the moss will always grow, and the unexpected will always arrive. You cannot scrub away the realities of being human. You cannot force the world to be a perfectly clean, silent stage, but you can change your relationship to the elements. You can move from the exhausted, rigid monk fighting the moisture to the person who realizes the lantern is meant to catch the dew. You can meet your life with a softness that is not brittle, with a patience that is not resigned, and with a courage that finally allows you to be heard. Think of the moments where you have felt most alive, most connected, and most at peace. They rarely occur when you are holding the iron hammer of judgment, or when you are tightly wound in the velvet of your own defenses. They occur when you have let go. They occur in the small, unguarded moments, a laugh shared with a friend, a quiet walk in the evening air, the act of sitting with a piece of work and being content with the progress you have made, however imperfect it might be. These are the moments of your true resonance. They are the times when you have finally stopped the performance and started the participation. As you look toward the morning, remind yourself that you do not need to arrive with a new, flawless instrument. You do not need to present a version of yourself that has been polished until it is unrecognizably smooth. You can arrive exactly as you are, a bell with a history, a heart with a depth, and a spirit that has finally learned how to trust the silence. The world needs the sound that only you can make, and that sound is only possible when you are willing to exist without the shroud. You are not a vessel that needs to be defended. You are a resonance that is meant to be shared. And so, in the small decisions you make tomorrow, the way you speak to yourself when you err, the way you pause when you feel the pressure to perform, the way you allow yourself to be still when the world is rushing, remember the bell. Remember that your resonance is not a product of your perfection, but of your presence. You are doing the work of a lifetime by simply deciding to be a little kinder to your own fractures. You are shifting the entire architecture of your inner world, moving from a fortress of defensive silence to an open house of lived experience. Every time you choose to untie the ribbon, you are inviting the world to meet you. And every time you choose to listen to the hum of your own heart, you are finally coming home to the one who has been waiting for this moment of grace all along. You have everything you need, and you have always been enough to be heard. The silence is not a hiding place anymore. It is the space where your life is finally permitted to ring. And in the quiet of this night, as you let go of the last of the iron, you can feel the entire structure of your being loosening, deepening, and coming to rest, finally free from the need to hide, finally free from the need to hammer, finally free to just be the resonant sound of your own existence, floating out into the great welcoming dark. The work of the bell founder is finished for now. You have spent so many hours standing in that scorched workshop, palms dark with the metallic dust of your own protection, eyes weary from tracking the velvet shroud you thought was your only safety. But look at your hands now. Resting upon the cool, silent surface of the bed, they are empty. And in that emptiness, there is finally a space for the night to enter. You do not need to check for fractures. You do not need to verify if the metal holds its shape in the dark. The clapper is still. The silk ribbon that tied you to the silence has been set aside, and its weight is replaced by the profound, muted pulse of the night air. Feel the way the atmosphere in this room has shifted. It is no longer a space where you must be vigilant, resonant, or perfect. It is a sanctuary, a quiet corner of the mountain temple, where you have been granted permission to step away from the labor of your own self-shrouding. The cracks in your life, the history, the detours, the moments that felt like being struck too hard, they will remain, woven into the texture of your metal, but they do not require your constant, frantic covering. They are held by something larger, something steadier, something that does not require you to be the guardian of every single vibration of your path. As you drift deeper into the stillness, let the image of the bell house fade into the soft velvet dark. Imagine the moonlight reflecting across the vast, calm valley outside, casting long, peaceful ribbons of light across the damp garden stones. The furnace of your effort is cold. The iron hammer is set down upon the earth. Everything you have been carrying, every jagged fear you have been trying to silence, is being held in this suspension, in this pause that the night provides. You are simply a bell that has reached the end of a long, resonant day, and the mountain does not ask you to strike until the morning light. Your breath is becoming a gentle, rhythmic hum, pulling you further away from the need to manage or control. With every slow, quiet exhalation, you are releasing a little more of that phantom grip, a little more of the weight of the protection that you have been holding in your shoulders and your chest, the muscles of your face, the tightness around your jaw, the tension in your hands, all of it is dissolving into the softness of the mattress. You are becoming as porous as the volcanic stone, as steady as the mountain, as unburdened as the bell that has finally learned to trust the silence. There is nothing left to tune. There is no note that must be reached before you close your eyes, even if there are memories of the striking, even if there are places where your metal feels thin or worn. Know that these are not evidence of your failure. They are the honest marks of a vessel that has traveled through the storm. They are the places where the air enters, where the resonance flows, where the reality of your own journey can breathe. You are not a structure meant to produce a flawless sound. You are a living, changing, unfolding presence, and the resonance is safe in the hands of the present. Let the sounds of the night, the faint, distant hush of the valley, the slow settling of the house be the only music in your temple. You are not required to do anything. You are not required to be anyone. You are not required to keep the vibration perfect with your own will. The architecture of your life is built on a foundation deeper than your own anxious effort, and that foundation is holding you perfectly, securely right here in this depth of rest. Your mind is like a quiet garden at the center of the mountain. The stones damp, the moss soft, the atmosphere undisturbed by the wind that passes far above. Feel the heavy, comfortable warmth spreading through your body. From the crown of your head to the soles of your feet, it is the warmth of finally being home. It is the warmth of realizing that you have been safe all along, even when you were so busy trying to create a silence that would never break. You have stepped out of the role of the shroud maker, out of the role of the fortress, and back into the role of the bell. And as a bell, you are entitled to the rest that this temple provides. You are entitled to the peace that this night offers, without any conditions, without any need to earn it through resonance. Everything that belongs to tomorrow will wait for tomorrow. Your questions, your uncertainties, the sound you are meant to make when the sun rises, they are not going anywhere, and they do not need your mental presence tonight. You are free to let them drift into the periphery, to let them exist as mere possibilities rather than current demands. Your world is small, contained, and entirely peaceful. It consists of the breath in your lungs, the coolness of the linens against your skin, and the quiet, steady rhythm of your own heart. As the last remnants of the day's restlessness fall away, recognize the gift of this silence. It is not an absence of meaning, it is the presence of your own true nature, beneath all the layers of shielding and all the habits of protection. It is the bell that is not defined by the velvet. It is the metal that is not defined by the hammer. It is you in your most essential, quiet, and peaceful form, resting in the stillness of the night. Trust in the unfolding of the world. Trust in the cycle that turns the day into the night and the striking into sleep. You are part of that great, unhurried rhythm, and you are exactly where the mountain has placed you. The velvet has fallen, the clapper is still, the temple is quiet, and it waits in the moonlight, perfectly complete in its own beautiful, textured, and honest way. And if the silence you were trying so desperately to protect was never something you had to build, but the simple, resonant peace that was already waiting in the space between every beat of your heart,